You are not angry because they did something. You are angry because your brain just handed them a remote control and you felt the click. Quick thing before we go further, we are building toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription genuinely helps this channel reach the people who actually want depth instead of recycled advice. And if this hits a nerve, tap like so the algorithm stops burying it. You have felt this. Someone says one line, one look, one smug pause, and suddenly your body is hotter, your thoughts get narrower, and your entire day reorganizes around them. You replay the moment like it is evidence in a trial. You draft speeches in your head. You want justice, or at least some kind of emotional repayment. And the part that is hard to admit is not that you got angry. Anger is normal. The disturbing part is how quickly anger turns into obedience. Not obedience in what you say out loud. Obedience in what you cannot stop thinking about. Obedience in how your attention gets hijacked. How your behavior becomes predictable. How you start moving in ways that are useful to the other person. Here is what is actually happening. Anger is not just an emotion. It is a bargaining strategy. It is your nervous system trying to change someone else's behavior by increasing the cost of crossing you. That is what anger evolved to do. It is social leverage in chemical form, but it only works when the other person believes your anger is expensive. And that is the first control point. The moment you show anger, you reveal what you are protecting. You reveal your boundaries, your insecurities, your status triggers, your moral buttons. You are basically telling them, here is where to press next time. Think about that for a second. When you get angry at a specific kind of disrespect, you are broadcasting your sensitivity profile. And sensitivity profiles are incredibly valuable information. They let other people predict you. This is why certain people seem like mind readers. They are not. They just notice what provokes you, then they use it like a steering wheel. Now here is where it gets interesting. You probably believe your anger is proof of strength. It feels like strength. It comes with energy, clarity, a sense of righteousness. But in many social environments, anger is not power. It is a confession. Because the social brain is constantly running a quiet calculation. Who can be made to move? Who can be baited? Who can be put off balance? And anger answers that question in 1 second. It says, I can be moved. Let me show you what I mean with a simple pattern you have definitely lived through. Someone does something small, maybe a subtle insult, maybe a boundary push. You react hard. They get this tiny advantage, not because they won the argument, but because they now know the size of the lever. Next time they do less. They barely do anything, and you still react because your system is already sensitized. And then it looks from the outside like you are unstable and they are calm. That calm is not maturity. A lot of the time it is strategy. They are outsourcing the emotional labor to you. They poke, you explode, then they stand there and watch you make their case for them. The mechanism behind this is something called contingent attention. Attention is a reward. In social systems, the person who can force your attention has power over you. Anger is one of the easiest ways to force attention because it recruits threat circuitry. Your amygdala flags the person as relevant. Your hippocampus stamps the memory as important. Your mind starts scanning for more evidence. You are not just mad, you are tracking. And tracking is labor. It costs sleep. It costs focus. It costs creativity. It costs patience with people who did nothing, so the other person gets to occupy your internal world rent-free. That is control. If you have ever thought, I hate that they still affect me, that is exactly what is happening. Your brain is treating them like an unresolved threat, and unresolved threats get priority processing. Here is the next layer most people miss. On anger does not only give the other person control of your attention, it gives them control of your identity. Because anger is not just about what happened. Anger is a story about what kind of person you are. It says, I am someone who cannot tolerate this. I am someone who must respond. I am someone who is not the type to let it slide. That identity feels protective, but it becomes a trap when the other person learns how to trigger it on command. Notice the pattern here. The more you pride yourself on being tough, respected, not disrespected, the more you have to respond to protect that identity. And the more you have to respond, the more predictable you become. It is like a security system that is so sensitive it gets triggered by wind, and now anyone can set it off. This is why some people will bait you publicly, not because they want to win the point. They want to force you into a role. If they can make you act angry, you become the angry one. Then anything you say afterward gets filtered through that label. It is a framing war. And anger is often the fastest way to lose the frame. There is research on this that lines up with real life. When people are angry, they show what psychologists call the illusion of control and optimistic risk estimation. Anger makes you feel certain. It makes you feel like your judgment is sharper, but studies have repeatedly found anger increases heuristic thinking, meaning you rely more on mental shortcuts and stereotypes. You feel like you are seeing clearly, but you are actually seeing simply. That is the second control point. When you are angry, you become easier to manipulate because you crave cognitive closure. You want the story to end. You want the villain identified. You want the verdict. And the person who can offer you a clean story can steer you. They can say, here is what is happening. Here is what you should do. Here is who is at fault. And your angry brain will often accept it because complexity feels like weakness in that state. Think about social media. Rage content spreads because anger compresses reality into a single accusation. It turns ambiguous human behavior into a simple moral geometry. Good and evil, victim and offender. That feels satisfying. It also makes you highly governable. Anyone who can direct your anger can direct your behavior. Now watch what happens in your personal life when you are angry. You start bargaining with your future self. You make promises you cannot keep. I will never talk to them again. I will say exactly this. I will expose them. I will quit. In the moment, it feels like integrity, but often it is your brain trying to restore status as fast as possible, and that leads to the third control point. Anger makes you trade long-term freedom for short-term relief. Here is what I have observed across a lot of relationships and workplaces. The person who gets angry first is often the person who loses negotiation power, because anger is information. It tells the room you are operating under urgency. Urgency is weakness in bargaining. In game theory terms, you are revealing that you cannot tolerate the current state, and if you cannot tolerate it, you will pay to change it. You will pay with concessions, with attention, with escalation, with impulsive decisions. And the other person might even provoke your anger specifically to make you bid against yourself. This is why, in some conflicts, the calm person is not the good person. They are the person who can wait. And the ability to wait is one of the most underrated forms of power. Let me make this concrete. Imagine a co-worker who subtly undermines you. If you explode, you give them a script. Now they can go to other people and say, see, they are emotional. They cannot handle feedback. Your anger becomes their evidence. They did not have to prove anything. You did it for them. Or imagine a partner who stonewalls. You get angry, you raise your voice, you plead, you demand. They get to play the victim of your intensity while staying in control of the pacing. The more you push, the more they retreat, and suddenly you are the one chasing. That is not a personality mismatch. That is a control dynamic shaped by nervous systems. Now, stay with me, because the next part recontextualizes everything. Most people think the solution is to calm down. That is shallow. The real issue is not intensity. The real issue is location of control. Anger becomes control for other people when it is externally anchored, meaning your emotional equilibrium depends on what they do, what they acknowledge, how they respond, whether they feel remorse, whether they understand you. In other words, your nervous system is waiting for their behavior to resolve your internal state. That is the leash. And the most brutal truth is this: if someone knows they can upset you, they do not need to win against you. They just need to keep you dysregulated long enough for you to make mistakes. So the question becomes, how do you move anger from a leash to a tool? Here is the deeper mechanism beneath anger that almost no one talks about. Anger is often secondary. It is a cover emotion. Under it is usually fear, shame, or grief. Not in a poetic way, in a functional way. Fear says, I might be unsafe or powerless. Shame says, I might be lower status than I want to believe. Grief says, I lost something I cannot get back. Anger is what you put on top because it feels active. It feels like doing something. It gives you a sense of forward motion. But here is the catch. When you use anger to avoid the underlying emotion, you become dependent on external targets. You need someone to blame so you do not have to feel what is underneath. And that makes you controllable. Because if someone can keep presenting themselves as the target, you never have to go deeper. You stay stuck at the surface, reacting. This is why some people keep you angry for years. They are not just a person. They become a psychological container, a place where you dump feelings you do not want to process. Now flip it. When you can name what anger is protecting, you break the spell, because then your brain stops treating anger as the only available move. Here is a practical framework I want you to steal. I call it the 3 transfers. In the moment you feel anger rising, your job is to transfer 3 things back to yourself: attention, meaning, and timing. First, transfer attention. Ask, what exactly is my mind doing right now? Usually it is zooming in on their face, their words, their tone. You deliberately widen the frame. You look for what else is true: your body on the chair, the room, your breath, the fact that you have options. This is not relaxation. This is cognitive decentering. It reduces the other person's ability to occupy your whole mental screen. Second, transfer meaning. Anger explodes when you assign a specific meaning to their behavior. They disrespected me. They think they are above me. They are doing this on purpose. Sometimes that is true, but meaning is where the control lever lives. So you ask a better question. What are the 3 most plausible explanations, including one that has nothing to do with me? That question alone weakens the automatic narrative. And if it turns out they did intend disrespect, you still win because you are choosing your interpretation instead of having it injected into you. Third, transfer timing. This one is huge. Most people do not realize that anger demands immediacy. It says, respond now or you are weak. That is the oldest trick in the world. So you practice one sentence that buys time without surrendering status. Something like, I am going to think about what you said, and we will continue this later. Or, I do not discuss things in this tone. We can talk when it is productive. Timing is power. When you choose the time of your response, you stop being a puppet. Now here is what makes this framework more than just tactics. It changes the incentive structure. When people learn they cannot control your attention, cannot dictate your interpretation, and cannot rush your reaction, they lose the handle. And you do not have to be cold or passive to do this. You can still be direct. You can still set boundaries. You can still confront. But you do it from a regulated place, which means your behavior becomes less predictable and more precise. This is the synthesis that ties everything together. Anger gives other people control over you when it becomes a signaling system you do not own. When it broadcasts your triggers, collapses your thinking, and forces urgency. So the goal is not to have less anger. The goal is to stop donating your anger as usable data. Stop making it a map to your buttons. Stop making it an alarm that anyone can pull. And if you want one mental model to remember all of this, use this. Anger is a currency. If you spend it impulsively, other people get rich. If you spend it deliberately, you buy boundaries, clarity, and change. The people who control you are not always stronger than you. They are often just better at making you react on schedule. So this week, notice the exact moment you feel the click, that internal moment where your mind locks onto someone and you think, now I have to do something. Pause right there. Transfer attention, meaning, and timing back to yourself. Because the most dangerous kind of control is not someone telling you what to do. It is someone making you feel like you have no choice but to react. If this changed how you see your own anger, tell me in the comments what situation came to mind first. And remember this line, because it is the whole video in one sentence. The moment your anger becomes predictable, it becomes someone else's tool,